Live to see it, friends, and welcome to The World Transformed. This program is your guide to an astounding future that lies ahead, a future that will be here sooner than you think, and one that you have an important role to play in bringing about. At The World Transformed, we want to introduce you to what may be the greatest transformation of them all, the one that begins with considering and acting on the almost limitless possibilities that lie before us, and that ends somewhere beyond the reach of the human imagination. So, when does this amazing future begin? Well, today is the day. My name is Phil Bowermaster, and with me in the virtual studio is my co-author, co-futurist, and co-host, Stephen Gordon. Hello, Stephen.
Hey, Phil. How are you?
Well, I am super fantastic. Happy Monday. How are you, my friend?
Man, I'm doing great. Starting another big week on the World Transformed. Got some good topics here for Monday's show.
We have got a fun one. I've called this Signs of the Times. But what this really is this is us checking in on the technological singularity, which we do, I don't know, at least once a month or so, I would say. we have at least a story.
And then hit it kind of, a glancing blow in the middle of that month too. So it's sort of our
occasionally we'll do whole shows about it, but usually it's just here's another story that proves that we're doing that. So I thought, well, we'll just check in and see if we really seem to be heading towards a technological singularity. And for those of you listening for the first time, or who have been listening for a while but still haven't heard us talk about this term, by the technological singularity, we're referring to a coming point in the future where machine intelligence outpaces human intelligence, and after that, history becomes very difficult to predict because we are the less intelligent species on the planet, right? The technological singularity. Well, give me in your words, Stephen. What's the singularity?
Well, I mean, we can tend to look into the future and kind of have some idea what goals that we as humanity have, right?
Yeah.
But ask your dog, your pet dog, Phil, what it thinks your goals for the future are. It's not going to have much of a clue, right? I mean, it does not have the ability to understand you. It is a lesser intelligence than you are, Phil, so it doesn't really understand what you do when you walk out the door, get into your car, and drive away. It doesn't have any idea what's going on with you. And unfortunately, that's the scary part of the technological singularity. What goals will these things that are going to be smarter than us, what will they have as their goals? And will we be able to keep pace with that at that time? And so, that's the technological singularity. It's the point at which we don't really our hands are off the reins at that point. We're off. Hands are off the steering wheel.
I know in the case of my dog, my dog thinks, both of them think that I exist to bring them cheese, right? To open the refrigerator.
Exactly.
And get cheese out.
we may just sort of sit back and say, well, the AIs exist to bring us goodies, right? At that point, I hope not. I hope that instead we're a part of the technological singularity ourselves, because we've advanced our own intelligence along with the machine intelligence. But that's another thing, isn't it? So,
but it's a good description of the imagery of the singularity. That idea of a singularity comes from mathematics, and it comes from physics. And it's when you think about a black hole, where gravity reaches a point where suddenly our laws of physics are no longer descriptive of what's happening. A singularity is this place where we just don't have the math or the language to describe what's happening. And I think that the dog analogy is a good one. When you're dealing with an intelligence that's greater than yours, that has its own motivations and desires, you're like the dog trying to figure out the human. You're dealing with something that's beyond your concepts, it's beyond your math, it's beyond your language. And certainly we hope that the singularity is beyond our math and language today, but not beyond what they will be when it occurs, because, to your point, we'll be moving ourselves along at the same pace, or following along behind, but still improving. If we become the junior partners, that's one scenario. If we're like the equal partners, that's another one. If we're the senior partners, that's another one, where humanity and the artificial intelligence are concerned. But that's it. That's
just hope to be in the mix. That's the thing. We don't want a her scenario. Where the AIs just take off on their own because they find us completely boring.
This is the movie Her. Stephen's not referring
to
a breakup that he had in college.
Exactly. No. I'm referring to the science fiction movie Her. nor do we want the Terminator scenario, which is even worse.
That's what I was going to say. Of all the scenarios where the AIs move on their own, her is a pretty good one, right? Because they just disappear.
At least they have some respect for the parent race, so that they don't hurt them. They just go out into the universe and do their own thing.
Yeah. What we don't want is a superior intelligence that is much more capable than us, looking around and saying, "Well, we got to clean all this up so we can get something done." With us being the mess. That's right. That would be bad. So here's our first story. The father of artificial intelligence says Singularity is 30 years away. This is interesting. We've talked about Jürgen Schmidhuber fairly recently. He's a very interesting AI researcher. He came up with a lot of the concepts that are being used in deep learning today. And he came up with them decades ago, these ideas that are just now kind of seeing fruition and really driving an awful lot of what we see happening kind of on the cutting edge of artificial intelligence today. And, just a pretty straightforward, it's going to happen. He thinks it's about 30 years away. And
that's interesting, number one, that he believes that, it's going to happen. But it's also interesting in that his date of 30 years is different from that of Ray Kurzweil's, which is more like 12 years, right?
Yes.
And so, in the grand scheme of things, the difference between 12 years and 30 years over the lifetime of our species is just, not even a blip in time. But in our lifetimes, it makes quite a bit of difference, doesn't it, Phil, to us personally? Whether we're looking at a 12-year window until the Singularity or a 30 makes quite a bit of difference to us. And so, in some ways, I hope that Jürgen is correct and that we have a little more time to make that great leap, right? And perhaps be a part of the leap ourselves. We actually have a shot at it if it takes 30 years, perhaps. Whereas if it just shows up, in 12 years, we may not have made much of a leap ourselves, right? So, I don't know. What do you think?
The time frame is always interesting on this. When Vernor Vinge first wrote his essay on the Singularity, kind of introduced the concept of it, and he said that machines are going to become smarter than people, and after that, history as we know it will end. It's kind of the defining moment in people using that term and thinking about it. But that was in the mid-'90s, and he said it would happen, I believe he said it would happen in about 30 years, which would put us kind of on the Kurzweil timeline, right? About 10 years from now, right? So roughly on the Kurzweil timeline. The thing is, if it's really going to happen, and it's going to happen 10 years from now, we've got only 10 years to prepare for all those potential hard takeoff scenarios. We've got only 10 years to get ready for the Terminator, right? For all of that stuff. On the other hand, if it's going to be 30 years, then we have to wait another 30 years before we see all the incredible benefits and all the magical, amazing stuff that's going to happen. So it's kind of a mixed bag as to when it happens. Right. And of course, there are cooler heads who say no, it can never happen, that it's a fantasy, and others who say that it may happen a century or more from now. What's interesting to me about Schmidhuber is this is the guy who has witnessed AI take off. He's the guy who came up with a lot of the key concepts, and he knows how long it takes, right? He knows how long it took from the ideas being introduced to the ideas kind of transforming the world, showing up and actually being the thing that everyone's doing and everyone's thinking about and everyone's talking about. So you kind of have to look at his time frame and go, well, yeah, he might know what he's talking about there.
It might be the difference might be this, Phil. I mean, if you ask, somebody that's just the man on the street, when did the internet show up, right?
Yeah.
You'd probably, get an answer that would be somewhere like the early to mid 90s would be
or later.
Most people would give. When the truth is that the first two nodes of what would become the internet, they were put together the year of my birth in 1969. So what's the real answer? Was the internet born in 69, or was it born in 95 or 94 or whatever? And, there's arguments to be made for both. And so, it may very well be when we look back on when did the singularity happen, there could be arguments to be made about when it is, when it happened. The first computers that had the capability, the processing capability of the human brain probably will show up in 12 years. Now, does that mean that we have greater than human level intelligence at that moment? Probably not, because it's not just the hardware; it's also the software, right? We have to, that has to that would tend to come later, right? So I don't know. It could very well be that both men are correct. It just depends on your point of view or what you consider the technological singularity. So,
well, and it could be that 12 years from now there is a greater than human machine intelligence somewhere, but 30 years from now is when it takes over, right?
Right.
These are,
it's had a chance to go to school on everything, and it's it and maybe others like it are at the forefront at that moment, right? So who knows?
One of the things he lays out here, and I think this timeline also disagrees with what you hear from Ray Kurzweil, is he says, imagine a cheap little device that isn't just smarter than humans, it can compute as much data as all human brains taken together. Well, this may become a reality just 50 years from now. I think according to Ray, is once you've got one human on a chip, it's not that long before you have all of humanity on a chip, all of human intelligence, because of the way exponentials occur. But even 50 years from now, that's not very long from now to consider the idea of, we carry around these smart devices that are incredibly intelligent compared to the kind of technology that was available 50 years ago. But the leap he's talking about there is almost unimaginable. To walk around with a device in your pocket that is smarter than the combined intelligence of all humanity, all 7 billion people, or whatever it would be 50 years from now, 10 billion people on the planet. Pretty amazing. Anyway, I love the matter-of-fact mainstream way this is stated here. The idea that, yep, the singularity is coming. It's just a question of when. That seems to be a more common idea. That you seem to be hearing that.
Yeah.
Hearing that more often. So,
well, I mean, in the years that we have been doing this program, Bill, and its predecessor program, since 2005 is when we started doing this. That this went from a very fringe idea to now a mainstream idea. And,
that's right.
And we've been watching this happen, and I find that interesting too.
Absolutely, it's fun to see it happen. Now let's see where's the proof. Well, we've got two additional stories here that don't really prove that the singularity is happening, but they're kind of interesting parallel developments. Let's put it that way. This one, Intel just put a quantum computer on a silicon chip. If you read this story, there's two different ways of reading this story, Stephen. And one is to say, well, this is no big deal. This is more like a publicity stunt. And by the way, we're going to have to do a whole show on just what's the difference between a publicity stunt and a major humanity-shaping event, right? Because they're getting harder and harder to tell about.
In the case of the car headed out towards Mars, the answer is yes. It's both, right?
We seem to be having this discussion every week.
Right.
Oh, is this a thing or is it just a publicity stunt? I don't know. Some major stuff is going on here. So what they do, right. they created a tiny little, 2-qubit quantum computer on a chip. And as we know, you really need about 50 qubits for a quantum computer to really get somewhere, to really do something for it. Or I won't say, as you know, for those listening for the first time, that's about where you have to be. So quantum computers are this embryonic technology. We're just learning a little bit about them. Potentially, they have the power to be incredibly transformative. That if you're going to have a greater than human intelligence, perhaps it will rely on quantum computing in ways that we don't understand yet. Quantum computers probably hold the answer to what happens when Moore's law runs out and we can't fit that much processing on a silicon chip anymore. And I think that's what's interesting about this.
Right. And Intel has a 50 qubit or near 50 qubit machine, but it has to be kept in a clean laboratory that's near absolute zero, right? I mean, it's very, very cold and exotic conditions, extremely clean, right? Even in places that are not subject to earthquakes, things like that. I mean, it's an exotic technology that requires exotic conditions to operate. What they're trying to do here, Phil, is put the quantum computer in your cell phone. If they can do this on a silicon chip, then the chances of being able to have it at room temperature and in a real-world environment tend to increase. And so while it's just, 2 qubits right now, that's you can see that holds promise. And so it's pretty exciting. I think find out that it's even a possibility.
I think that's the point exactly. If you look at a technology that requires this rarefied extreme environment, and you say, well, that's never going to be a thing. How does that impact my world?
If it is a thing, it's something that we have to tap into from afar, right? And
that's right. But if you look at something on a silicon chip, no one says, oh well, silicon chips, that idea is never going to take off, right?
It already has. Right.
Yeah, silicon chips are heavily involved in this entire transaction. You and I doing this, a lot of silicon chips involved. Anyone listening, there's silicon chips involved. Okay, there's
silicon chips between you and I, the speaker and the listener, right now. So
that's right. So we know how transformative that technology can be if they can get a quantum computer running on there, and this is just the tiny beginnings of that. But if they can, well, we already know how pervasive the silicon chip is, and if you can put that computing power there, look out. What do we call the show? The World Transformed, right? That's what we're talking about there.
Exactly, a transformed world, no doubt. Well, our last topic for the show today, Phil. This is an interesting one. Japanese tour firm offers virtual reality holidays. And my response, of course, when you posted this on Facebook, Phil, was to make a quip about Total Recall. Tell me about what this is, the experience here. There's a picture associated with the article. People are sitting in what looks like
it looks like the cabin of an airplane, right? They're all wearing VR headsets, and you think, well, what's going on? Are these people flying someplace with VR headsets on? No, they're not. That is just an environment for having the experience. So you get on board the plane, right? Before you don your VR headset, they serve you a nice 4-course meal. Then you put your headset on and you're on the trip. And you go to Paris and you have this 360-degree virtual reality tour of Paris. So you've effectively flown to Paris and now you're there in VR. And I don't know how it ends. At some point they say, okay, we're done with Paris, and you take your headset off and the quote-unquote plane lands, and you come out again. So it's like in an evening you have the experience of flying to Paris. You have a nice dinner, and then you look around the city. It's a far cry from Total Recall, right? Which is the example that you give, where in the original Philip K. Dick story, you're given the memories of having taken a trip. In the movie version, it appears that you're somehow given that experience in real time, and you can't tell if it's actually happening, or if you don't know whether you're actually having an experience or whether you're having a virtual experience. Put it that way. Exactly. That's what goes on in Total Recall. These people know they're having a virtual experience, so the drama.
I wonder, Phil, if this would be therapeutic for people who have a fear of flying.
Could be.
And let's say I'm just petrified of getting on an airplane to the point that I've actually got on an airplane, realized that I couldn't take the trip, and had to get off the plane. I just wonder if this wouldn't, something like this wouldn't help. I'm hopeful that it would.
Well, have you?
For some people,
I don't know. Have you watched much of the coverage of the Winter Olympics?
Very little.
Okay, well,
it's gotten poor ratings. I guess I'm not the only one that's not seeing it. But tell me about it.
Well, one of the interesting things is one of the sponsors is Microsoft VR. Okay, so we keep seeing these commercials for Microsoft Virtual Reality, and they are all about the clinical use cases, the therapeutic use cases, the educational use cases, and it's all shown very quickly. So you don't, obviously it's TV commercials, right? You're not getting any details at all. But that really seems to be the message that Microsoft is touting about VR. We think of it as primarily having been rolled out to date as kind of an entertainment platform, and Microsoft is showing it as very much this serious, make people stronger, make people healthier, change reality kind of platform.
Make people more capable. Because if you can be in multiple places throughout the world, right, by way of VR, that increases your capability as a worker. So, yeah.
And one of the commercials, it might be just the same commercial. I'm seeing it over and over, and I'm just catching little glimpses of it differently. But I think not. I think there are different versions of it. There's this guy. He's a motivational speaker, and he's pretty good. He's pretty rousing, and he's saying you have more capability than whole generations who came before. And he starts showing all this stuff you can do in VR, and you kind of get that feeling. It's like, okay, well, I see what you're saying. That sounds like hype on the one hand, in a very big way, but on the other hand, I see what you mean, and that's why I wanted to include this one, because we've been talking an awful lot about VR and AR, and we've been talking an awful lot about reality in general, and I think an idea that we're going to be contending with over the next few years is that the singularity is not just going to be this matter of machines getting smart. That's one of many things that's going to be happening. But there's a kind of a reality singularity that I think is going to occur. Our relationship to reality is going to be fundamentally changed over the next few decades. And by that I mean,
one of those things is that we're not necessarily where our physical body is, right? Our mind may be in some place different from our physical body. That capability is huge, right? You could argue that to some extent, technologies of even the ancient world, like the ability to write, well, that would transport the writer and his ideas throughout time and everywhere to whoever sits down and reads what that writer wrote.
Right.
But that is it's not the same kind of enriched experience that virtual reality gives. That's a two-way street throughout the world. You can be anywhere in the world that you need to be to get the job done by way of virtual reality, and maybe robotic presence if you need to have a physical presence in the room. And there's some of that happening as well.
Exactly. I think the reason it's going to take off is because we are pre-built to do it. We already, as you said, as you pointed out, for thousands of years, we have listened to stories and allowed ourselves to be transported to other places and times, right? We're ready to go, right? We have sat down and watched TV shows or movies or played games and completely immersed ourselves in realities that aren't the one we're actually in, right? Or we've just created them in our minds. So,
right.
There is nothing that I think humanity is more ready to do than take control of our subjective experience of reality and do with it what we will. And what will we do with it? Well, that's a good question. I think we're going to do a lot of amazing things. I think we will have the power of whole generations before us at our fingertips. We also will, there's just a lot of very base, unseemly things that we can do with it. There's a lot of dangerous, addictive things that we can do with it. And really horrible violent scenarios, really horrible sexual scenarios. I mean, there is a gamut of experiences that we will have available to us that we'll be able to create or that we'll be able to spend a tremendous amount of time in. And where that puts us as a species is a really good question, because I think the same technology that is going to tremendously empower us to learn and to do things will also be a technology that will have the capability of, or that will run the risk of, turning us into, something out of a dystopian science fiction story, right? Just these consumers of ongoing subjective experiences who are no longer fit for the real world, the quote unquote real world, right? So I think both of those scenarios sit out there, and you want to talk about just around the corner. What's the timeline on VR and AR becoming this pervasive presence in our lives? Is it 10 years out?
It could. I think it's sooner than 10 years.
Yeah.
Because, we already have, and I point to my favorite episode of Big Bang Theory, Phil, where Sheldon has decided that he's retreating from the real world and he's going to just be a telepresence robot going forward.
Right, yes. Right?
Well, it turns out that he is as 100% as effective at being annoying by a telepresence as he is in real life.
Right.
He is every bit as good, and more so, And it's a fantastic episode. But that's a real machine that they used in that episode. It's a little robot that wheels around and has it's basically a Skype platform, a battery-operated Skype platform that wheels around at the user's request. And and I've watched a couple of videos. Showed some people that were attending conferences and meetings and by way of these devices, and they said it's very interesting how you tend to give these robots the same personal space as you do an individual, and you begin to, and it doesn't take long to forget that they are not, right there in front of you. It's you're not going for the illusion of that they're actually there, but nevertheless your mind makes the leap.
Right.
And so the machines are already here to do what we're talking about. When do they hit the mainstream? 5 years. I would not put 10 years on it. I think it's going to happen quick.
But I think we'll quickly bypass that, right? The idea of, because that's a kludge when you've got people in the real world, and then you've got a few little telepresence robots. What happens when we're all just in the VR, right? I mean, it's like we've allowed that to subsume. It's like, well, I'm not going to be there, you're not going to be there, she's not going to be there. We're just going to have the conference in VR, right?
Right, and you're all equally, virtual presences in a place that doesn't even really exist.
Right.
And yet you're still able to get the job done.
Right. Or when it's half and half. You show up at an event and it's like you put your goggles on, and thanks to AR you see 150 people in the room. You take the goggles off and there's 20 of you in the room, right? And everybody else has come in through this technology. I think you quickly move through these stages, and I think you quickly end up in a place where the more compelling reality is the one that the computer provides. We already know that in a lot of ways through social media, that people, we've seen the videos of all the kids sitting around, they're at the bowling alley, and the one kid bowls a strike and looks up, and all her friends are looking at their phones, right? I mean, it's the idea, we're already picking one reality over another anyway. And I think that the temptation to do that, the ability to do that, the compulsion to do that is going to become so much stronger. So that when we talk about the singularity, I think increasingly we're going to talk not just about intelligence and not just about computer capability, but we're going to talk about this fundamental shift in where the real world is and how we interact with it. And with that, I see we've already gone over our time slightly, so I blame myself for that. But we're going to, guess what, Stephen? We're going to come back to this one lots of times. This is our big ongoing topic for, I don't know, until it happens, right? Until
12 years or 30 years, depending on who you believe, right?
Yeah. Just stay tuned, folks. We're going to be talking about this one some more. And we're also going to be back on Wednesday with another brand new show. We're going to be talking about education. So, Stephen, great talking with you today. Look forward to being with you all on our next program. And until next time, live to see it.